On the 25th of April, 1944, a Sikorsky R-4 hoverfly helicopter landed in a dense Burmese jungle clearing. The machine was small, underpowered, built for training, not war. It had never been designed to do what was about to happen. Lieutenant Carter Harmon was about to fly the first helicopter combat rescue in history. 4 men were stranded behind enemy lines. The Japanese were closing in, and this fragile machine was their only hope. The global situation in 1944 looked very different from the early days of the war. The Allies were now on the offensive in Europe. In the Pacific, island after island was falling back into Allied hands. In the jungles of Burma, the war remained bitterly unpredictable. The terrain was unforgiving. Disease was as deadly as bullets, and rescue, when things went wrong, often meant capture or death. Earlier that month, a Vultee Lone Vigilant Liaison aircraft had gone down deep in the jungle. Near the Chindwin River, the pilot and 3 British soldiers had managed to survive the crash. They were alive, they had food and water, but they were also isolated in an area the Japanese controlled, and nobody knew exactly how to get them out. Word reached the 1st Air Commando Group at Aberdeen. This was no ordinary outfit. The Air Commandos were maverick pilots and soldiers who operated behind enemy lines. They flew unorthodox missions. They improvised. They took risks that regular units would never consider. At Aberdeen, someone remembered something. They had a new helicopter, the R-4. It had never been used for rescue. No helicopter had ever been used for combat rescue. It was worth trying. The R-4 Hoverfly was the world's first mass-produced helicopter. The prototype had first flown in January of 1942. It was the result of Igor Sikorsky's steady progress in rotorcraft design. The single rotor spun at 11.6 meters in diameter. The aircraft could hover. It could land vertically. It could do things fixed-wing aircraft simply could not do. Vultee was also terrifyingly fragile. It had room for only 2 people in the cockpit, maybe 1 passenger. The engine was underpowered for the jungle heat and humidity. The airframe was light. There was no armor, no protection. A single machine gun burst could destroy it. End quote. When Harmon climbed into the cockpit on the morning of April 25th, he knew all this. He was 27 years old, a pilot trained in these new machines. He understood their limits. He also understood that 4 men were waiting in a jungle clearing, and the window to save them was closing fast. The flight inland was tense. Harmon navigated by landmarks and radio direction. He had no maps that showed the jungle with any detail. He flew low to avoid being spotted. The air was thick with moisture and heat. The engine labored. Every second mattered. Every fuel gauge. Reading was a calculation between getting there and getting back. Then he saw it. A small clearing. Smoke signals. The downed airmen had built a signal fire. They knew someone was coming, and they were terrified. The clearing was surrounded by dense jungle. It was barely big enough for the rotors to clear the trees. A fixed-wing aircraft could never land here. Only a helicopter could. Only this helicopter could. Harmon began his descent. The rotor blades churned the thick air. The fuselage settled. Ground effect. The ground came closer. Then contact. The wheels touched down. The men had seen him. They were running toward the aircraft across the clearing. The R-4 was designed to carry 1 passenger. Harmon looked at 4 waiting men, the pilot, and 3 soldiers. All of them needed to get out. He was going to have to make 2 trips. He was going to have to land, take 2 men back, return, land again, risk being caught, while he was on the ground, risk the Japanese hearing the helicopter and sending troops to the clearing. Risk everything. But there was no choice. He signaled to two of the men, the pilot and one soldier. They ran to the helicopter. Harmon helped them aboard, one in the cockpit jump seat, one in the rear. Every second felt like an hour. He checked the fuel gauge, the engine temperature. He had maybe 30 minutes of fuel before he had to turn back. The rotor blades spun faster. The machine lifted. The trees dropped away. Harmon turned the helicopter toward Aberdeen. Behind him, two men remained in the jungle clearing. They would have to wait. The Japanese might be close. The helicopter was gone. There was only forest and the sound of the rotors fading into the distance. The flight back was just as tense. The wounded soldier in the rear was in pain. The engine was laboring in the heat. The helicopter was at the limit of its performance. Harmon pushed it. He had to get back before dark. If darkness fell, the return rescue would become impossible. He would have to wait until morning. The two men left behind would have all night in the jungle, knowing the Japanese were searching for them. He made it. Aberdeen appeared through the haze, the landing pad, the waiting personnel. Harmon set the machine down and immediately began refueling. There was no time for anything else. The sun was dropping toward the horizon. The fuel gauge climbed. The engine temperature settled. A few minutes were all he could afford. Then he was airborne again, alone in the helicopter, flying back into the gathering darkness, back toward the clearing, back toward two men who had been waiting for hours, wondering if he would return, wondering if the Japanese had found them. The second approach was harder. Darkness was coming on fast. The jungle below was becoming shadow. Harmon had to navigate by memory and by the position of the hills against the fading sky. He was flying on instruments and instinct. Then he saw them again. Smoke, signals, a small fire in the clearing. The two men were still there, still alive, still waiting. This landing was more difficult. The light was worse. The rotor wash from the helicopter stirred up dust and smoke from the signal fire. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Harmon held the machine steady above the clearing. The two remaining men ran toward him through the haze. One was hurt. One was helping him along. They reached the helicopter. Harmon reached down and pulled them aboard. The engine was running rough. The fuel situation was critical. Harmon did not waste a second. The rotors bit into the darkening air. The machine lifted. He turned back toward Aberdeen. The jungle fell away behind him. The engine was screaming. The fuel needles were dropping. This time, N. Time, there was no margin. This time, if the engine failed, there would be no place to land except in that dark jungle below. But the helicopter held. The engine kept turning. The fuel lasted. The lights of Aberdeen appeared. Harmon brought the machine down hard on the landing pad. The rotors spun to a stop. It was over. 4 men who should have died in that jungle or been captured were alive. The first combat helicopter rescue in history was complete, and it had been accomplished in a machine so fragile that it had no right to fly at all. When Harmon climbed out of the cockpit that night, he was exhausted. The helicopter was damaged. The engine needed maintenance. But the mission had worked. What he had done that day would reshape warfare forever. No longer would wounded soldiers or downed pilots be abandoned behind enemy lines. If they could signal their position, if a helicopter could reach them, if a pilot was willing to take the risk, they could come home. The story of that rescue spread quickly through the Air Commando Group. It spread through the 5th Air Force. It reached home. The newspapers picked it up. First helicopter rescue in F. Combat, the headlines read. It was a stunning achievement, but it came at a cost. The R4 was never meant for this. It was never designed to be pushed this hard, this far, this many times. The helicopter itself paid the price. Harman was killed in a later crash while attempting another rescue. The machine that had been his hope became his loss. But the R4 had proven something that day in Burma. It had shown that the helicopter was not a curiosity, not a training tool. It was a weapon, a tool of rescue, a machine that could reach places and do things that no other aircraft could do. Every modern helicopter rescue owes its existence to that moment when Carter Harman brought his fragile machine down in a jungle, clearing and showed the world what was possible. The R4 flew for another year in Burma and the Pacific. It performed medical evacuations. It carried supplies to remote outposts. It scouted enemy positions. But it was never mass produced beyond 130 examples. More powerful, more reliable helicopters quickly replaced it. The technology evolved. The machines got better. But the mission remained the same. Get there, bring them home, and do it with the courage to risk everything. That clearing in Burma is long gone now. The jungle has reclaimed it, but somewhere in the historical record, in faded photographs, and in the memories of the men who were there, that moment lives on. The moment when an underpowered, fragile machine did something impossible. The moment when a young pilot refused to accept that 4 men should be left to die. The moment when the helicopter, as a tool of human rescue, was born. Do you think Harman knew that day that he was changing warfare forever? Or was he simply focused on saving 4 lives? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever wondered where modern helicopter rescue came from, if you've ever been amazed by how these machines can reach places no one else can, now you know the answer. It started in a jungle with a fragile machine and a pilot willing to do the impossible. Hit like so YouTube shows this story to more people, and subscribe so you don't miss the next untold chapter of the war that changed everything. Next time, we're looking at the other first. The first jet fighter, the first rocket aircraft, the machines that Hitler thought would save Germany at the very moment he was already lost. Thanks for watching.